Imagine if tomorrow the internet just stopped working. Forever. No more memes, no emails, no digital banking. Just a black screen. At first, you'd think it's a glitch. But then, the shipping lanes freeze. Global trade grinds to an absolute halt. Supermarket shelves empty out within days. Power grids fail. Cities go dark. It sounds like the plot of a generic sci-fi movie, right? But what if I told you this exact nightmare already happened? Not in the future, but in the distant past. Over 3,000 years ago, humanity experienced a global system failure so severe that people literally forgot how to write. Welcome to the Late Bronze Age. Around 1200 BCE, the Mediterranean was home to the greatest empires the world had ever seen. We're talking massive, interconnected superpowers. The mighty Egyptians, the fierce Hittites, the wealthy Mycenaeans. They had towering ziggurats, bustling harbors, and a global economy that rivaled our own in its complexity. Kings sent each other polite letters on clay tablets, basically the ancient equivalent of passive-aggressive emails. They traded exotic goods, gold, and most importantly, the lifeblood of their entire civilization, bronze. Bronze was the microchip of the ancient world. It made their weapons, their tools, their entire way of life possible. But this glorious, glittering web of trade was incredibly fragile. It relied on a perfectly balanced system. And then, almost overnight, someone, or something, pulled the plug. The cities burned. The trade stopped. Millions died. Empires crumbled into dust. And a dark age descended that lasted for centuries. What caused the most catastrophic collapse in human history? And more importantly, could it happen to us? To understand the sheer scale of this apocalypse, we first have to travel back to the height of their glory, the Late Bronze Age. The year is roughly 1200 BCE. The Eastern Mediterranean is a thriving cosmopolitan neighborhood of superpowers. In the south, you had the new kingdom of Egypt. With endless grain and rivers of gold, they were basically the billionaires of the ancient world. To the north, the Hittite Empire ruled Anatolia, a terrifying military juggernaut armed with cutting-edge war chariots. And in the west, the Mycenaeans of Greece, master architects, fierce warriors, and unparalleled seafarers. But these weren't isolated, lonely kingdoms. They were deeply intertwined in an incredibly complex network. They didn't just trade goods. They signed peace treaties, arranged royal marriages, and exchanged art and ideas. It was the ancient version of globalization. And the single engine driving this entire golden age, bronze. But here's the catch. Bronze is an alloy. You can't just dig it out of the ground. You have to mix 90% copper with 10% tin. Now, finding copper was relatively easy. The island of Cyprus was practically bursting with it. But tin? Tin was one of the rarest materials on Earth. It was harder to find than a polite comment on the internet. To get enough tin, these Mediterranean empires had to import it from mines as far away as modern-day Afghanistan. That meant moving heavy rocks on the backs of donkeys across harsh deserts and mountains for thousands of miles. They built a highly optimized, global, just-in-time supply chain, 3 millennia before Amazon Prime. What could possibly go wrong? To understand the collapse, you have to realize that no single empire was self-sufficient. They were cogs in a massive, hyper-specialized machine. Greece produced olive oil and fine pottery, which they traded for Egyptian grain to feed their rapidly growing cities. The Hittites exported copper and raw materials, demanding Mycenaean weapons and Egyptian gold in return. As long as the trade winds blew and the ships sailed, the machine hummed perfectly. Everyone got ridiculously rich. But around 1200 BCE, the climate began to change. A massive, decades-long drought swept across the Mediterranean. Rivers dried up. Lush, fertile fields that had fed millions suddenly turned into brittle, cracked dust. Crops failed year after year. Suddenly, there wasn't enough food to go around, anywhere. The legendary Egyptian granaries, the emergency backup drive of the ancient world, started running dangerously low. Panicked kings sent desperate letters. We have clay tablets from this era that literally say, "There is famine in our lands." The Hittite Empire, heavily reliant on imported grain, found itself starving and completely desperate. But Mother Nature wasn't done playing her apocalyptic bingo card. Next came the earthquakes. A geologic fault line running straight through the Mediterranean suddenly woke up, unleashing a series of violent tremors. Massive quakes struck Greece and Anatolia. Palaces crumbled, infrastructure shattered, and trade ports were completely destroyed. Remember that highly optimized, perfectly balanced supply chain? It was suddenly hit by a global famine and a localized apocalypse. The first dominoes had fallen. The ancient economy was bleeding out, and the vultures were already circling. With the empires weakened by famine and shattered by earthquakes, the Mediterranean was a wounded animal, and the scent of blood drew in a new, terrifying threat from the sea. History knows them only as the Sea Peoples. Who were they?
A wanted poster
We still don't
with a
exactly
question
know.
mark.
They
Who
didn't leave
exactly
behind
are we
written
looking
records,
for?
just a trail of ashes. They weren't a single nation, but a loose coalition of seafaring raiders. Essentially, heavily armed climate refugees forced to migrate and conquer just to survive. Desperate and heavily armed, they swept across the Mediterranean like a swarm of locusts, landing first in Anatolia. The mighty Hittite Empire, already starving and trying to rebuild from earthquakes, stood no chance against this relentless tide. Their invincible war chariots were useless in the ruined terrain. Within a few short years, the entire Hittite Empire was wiped off the map. Next, the Sea Peoples turned their sights on Greece. The great Mycenaean palaces, the centers of art and trade, were burned to the ground. And here is where the domino effect became fatal. With trade routes severed, the supply of tin completely vanished. No tin meant no bronze. No bronze meant the remaining armies couldn't replace their weapons or repair their armor. Imagine fighting a war today, but suddenly the world runs out of bullets and steel. The collapse was exponential. By 1177 BCE, the glittering network of superpowers was gone. Anatolia was dark. Greece was in ruins. Only one major empire remained standing amidst the ashes. The billionaires of the ancient world. Egypt, a massive, unstoppable armada of sea peoples, was now heading straight for the Nile Delta. The world's greatest superpower was about to face the ultimate test of survival. The final boss of the Bronze Age. The year is 1177 BCE. Pharaoh Ramses III knows the swarm is coming. He mobilizes every last soldier and ship he has. They set a massive trap at the mouth of the Nile Delta. It's a do-or-die moment. If Egypt falls, civilization falls with it. The battle is brutally fierce. The Sea People's ships are lured into the shallow waters, where Egyptian archers rain down fire from the shores. For the first time, the unstoppable horde is stopped. The Sea Peoples are defeated, their fleet shattered and scattered into the winds. Egypt wins. They survived the apocalypse, but it was what historians call a Pyrrhic victory. The cost was absolute devastation. The Egyptian treasury is completely drained. Their armies are decimated, and the global trade network they relied on to rebuild is gone. So, the Bronze Age is officially dead. But wait, humans have survived wars and natural disasters before. Why was this time so different? To understand why the world stayed dark for centuries, we have to look at the science of complex systems and hyper-coherence. Think of a simple society, like a small stack of wooden blocks. You can remove a piece, and the structure usually stays standing. But a hyper-specialized, globalized society is like an insanely tall, incredibly complicated tower. Every single block depends on another. This is hyper-coherence. The system is incredibly efficient, but it has zero redundancy. If one vital node fails, the entire structure undergoes a catastrophic cascading failure. It doesn't just damage the system, it completely deletes it. When the Bronze Age collapsed, it wasn't just cities that burned. Institutional knowledge simply evaporated overnight. Blacksmiths forgot how to forge. Architects forgot how to build. Without the global supply of tin, making bronze became literally impossible. And the most terrifying loss of all? The scribes died out. The actual knowledge of how to read and write vanished. The Bronze Age collapse wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing fade to black. The lights of civilization flickered and died. The great coastal cities were completely abandoned to the elements. Survivors fled inland, climbing high into the hills to build isolated, fortified mountain villages. Global populations plummeted. The vibrant, cosmopolitan, interconnected world was replaced by scattered, terrified communities of subsistence farmers. For these survivors, there was no more art, no more diplomacy, and no more luxury. They only cared about one thing: surviving the winter. But why couldn't they just rebuild their old glory? Why forget everything? Well, think of human progress as a massive video game tech tree. To build a grand palace, you need advanced bronze tools. To make bronze tools, you need international trade. To trade, you need massive ships. When the base of the tech tree rotted away, all the advanced knowledge above it was instantly locked. They couldn't build the tools to build the tools. For over 300 years, the Mediterranean went completely, terrifyingly quiet. No great statues were carved. No grand temples were built. No epic poems were written. It's a period historians literally call the Greek Dark Ages. Someone hit the pause button on human progress, and the screen stayed frozen. But humanity is nothing if not stubbornly persistent. When you are pushed to the absolute brink of extinction, necessity becomes the mother of invention. Since the global supply of tin was gone forever, bronze became impossibly expensive and rare. To survive, they desperately needed a new substitute. So they started looking at a different kind of rock, one that was literally everywhere. You didn't need a massive international trade network to find it. It was iron. Now, iron was actually worse than bronze. It was brittle, it rusted easily, and it required insanely hot fires to forge. But they had no choice. They had to adapt. Slowly, painfully, generation after generation, they learned to build hotter furnaces and master this stubborn metal. The catastrophic death of the Bronze Age didn't just end a golden era. It violently forced humanity to evolve, birthing the Iron Age. But here is the fascinating part. The Iron Age wasn't built by massive, wealthy empires. It was built by small, scrappy survivors. Look at the map after the collapse. The giant, monopolistic superpowers are gone. In their place, dozens of tiny, independent city-states popped up. Without the rigid Egyptian or Hittite overlords controlling the seas, new players like the Phoenicians and early Israelites could finally enter the game. Systems scientists call this a shift from a centralized network to a decentralized one, and it changed the survival mechanics of humanity. In a highly centralized system, all trade and power flows through a single king. If that central hub gets destroyed, the entire network dies. But in a decentralized network, power is spread out. If an earthquake or pirate swarm destroys one city, the rest of the network easily survives. This systemic decentralization touched absolutely everything. It even completely revolutionized how human beings communicate with each other. During the Bronze Age, writing was an elitist luxury. Scribes spent decades memorizing thousands of complicated, hyper-specific cuneiform symbols. But in the chaotic Iron Age, Phoenician merchants needed something fast and resilient. So they invented the alphabet. Just 22 simple letters that anyone could learn. This brings us to a fundamental law of all complex networks: the eternal trade-off between efficiency and resilience. The Bronze Age was perfectly efficient. It generated maximum wealth and zero waste. But it was fragile. It was a global economy made of glass. The Iron Age was the opposite. It was messy, fragmented, and less wealthy at first. But it was resilient. It could take a punch and bounce back. If this sounds familiar, it's because ecologists see this exact same cycle happen in nature all the time. When a massive forest fire sweeps through an old-growth forest, it seems like the ultimate apocalypse. The giant, ancient trees are burned to ash, but that ash is the ultimate fertilizer. The destruction of the old giants clears the canopy, allowing a million new, diverse saplings to finally see the sun. Sometimes destruction is just the first step of learning something entirely new. And speaking of learning, that brings us to the perfect tool for building your mind. Today's sponsor, SkillTree. If you want to build your own real-life tech tree without waiting for a 300-year dark age, SkillTree offers thousands of interactive, animated lessons in science, history, and complex systems. Use the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get 20% off your annual premium subscription. Thanks to SkillTree for supporting our channel and helping us keep the lights of civilization on. All right, sponsor break over. Let's get back to the terrifying existential dread of the apocalypse. This brings us to the most uncomfortable question of this entire video. Look around at our modern world. Are we currently living in a fragile, highly efficient Bronze Age system, or a resilient Iron Age one? Today, our global supply chains are a marvel of engineering. They make the ancient Mediterranean look like a local farmer's market. But just like them, we are hyper-specialized. We rely on just-in-time logistics to keep everything perfectly efficient and cheap. Your local supermarket might look like a paradise of abundance, but it only holds about 3 days' worth of food if the delivery trucks stop. And instead of bronze, our entire modern civilization runs on a different kind of rare magic rock. Semiconductors. The vast majority of the world's most advanced microchips are manufactured in just a handful of incredibly specialized factories. If a natural disaster or global conflict were to suddenly sever that specific node, would our Jenga tower survive? In recent years, we actually experienced a terrifying stress test of this exact system, and we barely caught it in time. The global events of 2020 and 2021 sent massive shockwaves through our just-in-time logistics. The dominoes started falling. Suddenly, massive car factories and tech giants around the world had to completely shut down their production lines. Why? Because they were missing a single, microscopic component manufactured on the exact opposite side of the planet. Just like the Bronze Age, our hyper-coherence means a localized problem instantly becomes a catastrophic global shortage. Take Taiwan, for example. It produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors and 90% of the most advanced ones. But making these complex magic rocks requires millions of gallons of ultra-pure water every single day. And in 2021, Taiwan experienced its worst drought in over half a century. Reservoirs literally dried up to the cracked earth. The parallels are staggering. The exact same climate vulnerabilities that crippled the Hittites are currently threatening our modern magic rocks. We like to think our advanced technology makes us completely immune to nature. But nature always holds the ultimate veto power. But what about the sea peoples? Surely we don't have mysterious, stateless raiders burning down our infrastructure today. Enter the modern sea peoples. Stateless cybercriminals and unpredictable geopolitical actors operating in the shadows. They don't need wooden ships and bronze swords. A single malicious code can swarm the network and paralyze an entire nation. In a hyper-connected world, shutting down the digital logistics grid is exactly the same as burning down an ancient trade port. Everything stops. So we have the fragile global supply chains, the extreme climate vulnerability, and the invisible stateless raiders. The clock is ticking. Let's look at the most basic human need: food. Today we produce enough calories to comfortably feed nearly 10 billion people. Our supermarkets are modern cathedrals of absolute abundance. But this modern miracle is an illusion, built on a single invisible foundation: synthetic fertilizer. Specifically, the Haber-Bosch process, which pulls nitrogen out of the air. Half the protein in your body right now comes from this exact process. But creating this magic plant food requires an astronomical amount of energy, usually in the form of natural gas. And where does that gas come from? Massive, continent-spanning pipelines that look suspiciously like the fragile trade routes of the Bronze Age. The Hittites relied on tin imported from Afghanistan. We rely on energy pumped across thousands of miles of geopolitical fault lines. If a conflict, a cyber attack, or a natural disaster severs just one major pipeline, the dominoes start falling instantly. Energy prices skyrocket. Fertilizer plants, unable to afford the gas or completely cut off, are forced to shut down their machines. Without synthetic fertilizer, global crop yields would collapse by nearly 50% within a single season. The cost of basic staples like wheat and bread would inflate so fast it would make your head spin. And as history has proven time and time again, every society is only 3 missed meals away from total chaos. When people can't feed their children, they don't care about the stock market, supply chains, or international treaties. They riot. This is the terrifying reality of hyper-coherence. Energy, food, and social stability aren't separate issues. They are the exact same Jenga tower. Pull out the energy block and the food block falls. Pull out the food block and the stability block shatters. The Bronze Age collapsed because their interconnected system couldn't handle multiple shocks at once. Are we truly any different? The horrifying answer is no. If our foundational blocks are pulled, our magnificent tower will collapse just as spectacularly. It wouldn't take decades like it did in 1200 BCE. In our hyper-fast world, it would take weeks. The power grids would be the first to go. Without constant digital communication and fuel, massive cities would go completely dark, followed immediately by the water pumps, the sanitation systems, and the refrigeration units keeping our food edible. Hospitals would lose life-saving equipment. Transportation would freeze. The global internet would shatter into isolated, useless fragments. We would be thrust into a new dark age, surrounded by the useless steel and glass skeletons of our former glory. People wouldn't forget how to read, but the servers holding all our collective human knowledge would eventually power down forever. Imagine a modern smartphone turning into nothing more than a shiny, incredibly complex paperweight. We are 8 billion people sustained by a machine. Without the machine, the Earth can naturally only support a fraction of us. The survivors would have to scatter, forming isolated, self-sustaining communities just to survive the harsh new reality. It's a terrifying, almost paralyzing thought. Is this our inevitable destiny? Are we just waiting for the sea peoples of the 21st century? If you look strictly at the math of hypercoherence, the answer seems to be a resounding, depressing yes. Every complex civilization in history has eventually hit an expiration date, a point where it became too complex to sustain itself. We are currently standing at the very peak of the highest, most precarious timeline in human history. So, should we just panic and buy a bunker? Actually, no. Because there is one massive, fundamental difference between us and the Bronze Age. We possess something the ancient Egyptians, Hittites, and Mycenaeans didn't have. We have the scientific method and systemic self-awareness. When the rain stopped in 1200 BCE, kings blamed the gods. When our climate changes, we have satellites tracking carbon parts per million. We are the first civilization in history that can actively monitor our own hypercoherence. We literally have error logs for our reality, but awareness isn't our only advantage. Our backup systems are profoundly different. Yes, our servers would die without power, but unlike the Bronze Age, our knowledge isn't locked in a few elite palaces. We have printed billions of physical books, and we've actively planned for the apocalypse. Deep inside an icy mountain in Norway sits the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. It holds over 1 million crop samples from around the world, safely frozen in the permafrost, requiring zero electricity to stay cold. Nearby, the Arctic World Archive stores the blueprints of modern technology and open-source code on specialized microfilm designed to last 1,000 years. Even if the grid fails, the instruction manual for civilization is physically buried in the ice. But there's a catch. Treating the apocalypse as an inevitable fact is a terrible strategy. Rebuilding from the ashes is miserable. Surviving a collapse is much worse than preventing one. So, how do we prevent our massive Jenga tower from falling? We have to willingly sacrifice a little bit of efficiency to buy back our resilience. It means re-engineering our world. Instead of one massive, incredibly fragile tower, we build a network of smaller, stable towers that support each other. Instead of relying entirely on one massive natural gas pipeline that can be severed in a single cyber attack, imagine thousands of local microgrids powered by wind and solar. If one grid gets knocked out by a storm or a hacker, the rest of the network doesn't care. The lights stay on. Food keeps growing. Systems scientists call this modular resilience. It's the ultimate defense mechanism against the domino effect. To survive the 21st century, we don't just need better technology or faster supply chains. We need a fundamental upgrade to human psychology.